show you how to stitch out the one fabric version of the Crazy Patch stocking. For this I've got some cutaway stabiliser, some silver and white thread, masking tape, my scissors, my 5x7 hoop. I'm using a fabric called Scuba, which is a 4-way stretched knit, and I've got 2 pieces at 11x15 for the lining. I've got 8 pieces because I'm doing the front and the back for this embroidered rather than doing a plain back. So I've got 8 pieces at 6x8, and I've got 8 pieces of fleece batting at 6x8 as well. I've loaded the first file into my machine, and this is the FAB file version of the file. The other one is for the multicoloured fabrics. So the first one's all loaded in. I'm going to hoop my stabiliser. I'm going to pop that in my machine, and I'm going to stitch round number 1, which is the outline. Next I'm going to add my fleece, and I'm going to make sure that all the outline is covered. And I'm now going to stitch round number 2. I'm now going to cut away all the excess batting from around the edge, and I'm going to cut right up to the stitch line. And this just makes it less bulky when it comes to sewing it all together. Okay, I'm now going to place my fabric over the top, pop it in my machine and stitch it down. I'm just going to put a little bit of tape top and bottom to stop it shifting around, as this is quite a slippery fabric. I don't want it to slip and slide about when it's being stitched, especially as the batting that I'm using, the fleece batting that I'm using, has quite a high loft to it. So I'm now going to pop that in my machine and stitch round number 3. Next we start to do the quilting, so I'm now going to stitch round number 4. I'm staying with white. The only time I will be changing my thread to silver is for the fancy decorative stitching. So here's round 4. Now I'm going to do round number 5, which is the top section here. And now round number 6, which will do this bottom section here. I'm now going to stitch round 7, and now number 8. Well, that's all the stitching done for the first section. Look, isn't that scrumptious? Okay, so I can now remove this from my hoop. I love white on white stuff, especially embroidery. It always looks so crisp and clean and fabulous for Christmas projects. Okay, so next we're going to have to mark a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way round here. So what I've done is I cut a little strip of paper, well, card, to 1/2 inch, and I'm just going to put it on the stitch line and just mark off all the way around. And here we'll be cutting back to the stitch line here, because this is where it's going to be joined. Okay, so that's our first piece completed. I've joined up my dotted line around here, and I'm now going to cut it away. Okay, there it is. Now on to our second piece. So I'm hooping my stabiliser again. And I'm now going to pop it into my machine and stitch the first round of the second file. I'm now going to place my fleece wadding on. And stitch it down with round number 2. It's now time to add the fabric over the top. I'm now going to stitch round number 3. Now for the quilting, round number 4. Now it's round number 5 on the left hand side. There's these colour stops in that allow you to change colour if you wanted to. If you don't want to, you just skip through them, the ones you want and you don't want. Now round number 6, the right hand side. I'm now going to change my thread back to silver for the next round of stitching. I'm now going to do round number 7 and now number 8. Next we need to cut away along here because that's where we're going to join the first piece to. I want to get it close to the line as possible. Okay, it's now time to attach this piece, and I want to line up the stitching here on top of the stitching here and making sure that the edges line up too. I'm going to use a piece of tape for this. You're going to want to slow your machine down so that you've got a bit of control over this, and if you can't slow it right down, you might have to push start and stop to get it to slow right down. I'm going to pop a pin in here. Now when you use pins, make sure that they're as far away from your stitch line as possible because they can do a lot of damage to your machine. Okay, I think that's okay. Okay, I'm now going to pop that in my machine and stitch around to number 9, which is going to join the 2 pieces together. Now I'm going to do number 10. Now around number 11. I'm now going to remove my pins. And my tape. Now I forgot to trim away the batting under here earlier, so I will do that in a minute off camera because I won't be able to see what I'm doing very well otherwise. Well, I don't know, I'll give it a go. I'll try it now. Okay, that's good enough. Okay, I can now remove that from my hoop. And as before, for the seam allowance around here, I'm now going to do exactly the same around here, and then this part here will be cut away because that will form our next join onto piece number 3. Okay, I can now cut that away. Okay, and I'm now going to go around the edge here. Trim this piece back here. Okay, so there's my 2 pieces completely joined. I'm sure you'll agree it's starting to look really lovely. Okay, now time to hoop my fabric for the third piece. I'm now going to pop it into my machine and stitch the outline. I'm now going to place my batting on there. And I'm going to stitch it down. And I'm now going to add my fabric. And stitch it down. I'm going to stitch number 4, which is the stipple stitching. Now round number 5. And round number 6. I've changed my thread over to silver. I'm now going to stitch round 7, which is the decorative top stitching. And round number 8. I'm now going to cut away all the excess fabric, and once again I forgot to remove the batting, so I'm going to remove that as well, because this is where this piece is going to join on. Let's start by removing the tape. I'm now going to place my other part onto the line and line it up as before, so that the edge stitch line works well, and also this stitch line here sits on top of this stitch line here. And I'm going to use pins to hold that in place. Okay, I'm now going to pop that back in my machine and do the joining stitch, which is round number 9. And now number 10, which is the rest of the joining stitch here. Now number 11, which is the fancy top stitching. Lastly, number 12. My gosh, this is looking really delicious now. Okay, so time to take pins and tape and everything out. And I'm going to cut this bit back while it's still in the... No, I won't. I'll do it afterwards. Okay, so take that out the hoop. And I'm now going to do my seam allowance along here. And I'm going to do it from the back as before. Quite an easy one, this one, because it's a straight line. Okay, let's take this bit of stabiliser out. And do the same this side. Oops, my stabiliser's got caught up a little bit there. Okay, and I can now cut all that back. I will take out the batting here. I'll do that off of camera because you don't need to see that really. I won't bore you. Okay, now I'm going to trim up along here so that, because that's going to be our next join, so we want that nice and close. Okay. Just going to trim it up from the front as well because it looks a bit untidy there. Okay, I think that's good. It's looking nice. I love, love, love it. Okay, time to hoop up again for the last piece of this side. Okay, I'm now going to put that in my machine and do the first round of file number 4. Place my batting on there now and stitch it down. I'll even remember to cut away the excess stabiliser this time. Once out 4 isn't too bad, is it? Apologise for my lighting. We've got storms around and my lights tend to flicker. Okay, so now I'm going to put my fabric on top. Now for the quilting, and now number 5, number 6. I've swapped over threads and put my silver in, and I'm now going to do the 2 lines of decorative stitching, which is number 7 and number 8. Now number 8. I'm going to cut away all along here so that this piece can be joined to it as for the previous pieces. Now to tape and pin that in place. once again, pins well out of the way of the stitch line. Okay, I'm now going to pop that into my machine and do round number 9, which is the joining stitch. Now number 10 and number 11. Now for the decorative stitching, number 12, number 13, number 14. I'm now going to free this from the hoop. And cut away this piece of stabiliser. And I can now carry on and do my seam allowance around here. So just as I did before, and my little piece of card. And I can now trim that up. And I've now got a perfect template for my backing fabric, my lining, sorry. So it's going to be done in exactly the same way, exactly the same steps, exactly the same sequence. The only difference will be, it will be a mirror image of this one. I've got my 2 pieces of lining and I've pinned my stocking over the top, and I'm going to cut out around it now. Okay, I'm now going to unpin it. And now I have the pieces to line both sides of my stocking. We're now going to piece it all together. I've cut 4 pieces of faux fur at 8.5 by 4 because I want quite a wide cuff on my stocking. So I'm going to put some of this aside. I'm also going to put a hanger on, and I've got a piece of ribbon and I've pinned it in going towards the corner on the front piece of the stocking. Next thing to do is I want the faux trim up there, so I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to pin all the way along here. So I'm taking one edge to the very edge of the stocking. Just going to pin that there, and on the other end here, because I'm actually going to stitch it from the other side because I've got a nice line here that I can follow. So now I'm going to repin it this side and take the pins out from the back. So I can take these ones out. I am leaving in, actually I don't need to. I'm going to pin this here. This is for the ribbon. This is the one that's holding the ribbon here. I don't want that to move around while it's being stitched. So next thing to do is to stitch from end to end all the way along here, and then afterwards I will be trimming off the end. I've pinned my lining as well, and I've made sure that when the 2 right sides are together that they all line up, because if I had this round the wrong way I'm going to have fur with against fur backing, and I want fur against fur so that when I join it all together it's all round the right way. So now I'm going to stitch it, and then I will trim up this end. My sewing machine has decided that it doesn't like stitching thin stretchy stuff, so I've attached or pinned a piece of tearaway stabilizer to the back in the hope of fooling it into thinking that it's thicker than it really is, so that it stitches properly. Now that the cuffs are sewn onto the two pieces, I'm going to pin the two pieces of fur together. So I'm going to line up the corners on this and then just pop my pins in. Like so. And now I need to chop off this end before I stitch it. So I'm just going to turn that around so that I can see what I'm doing. Lay my quilting rule on top, and I'm aligning it so that it's straight to the fabric. And then I'm just going to cut it off. Like that. And pop one more pin in the end here. Oops, pins are jumping all over the place. Just to stop it from slipping. And now I'm going to stitch it, and I can do a 1/4 inch seam here because it's not going to make any difference at all. If you do a 1/2 inch, it really doesn't matter, as long as you do exactly the same on both pieces so that when they're put together it works. So now I'm going to pop that in my machine and stitch it. Okay, so both pieces are now stitched with their linings and their fur cuffs. So what we have to do now is put both right sides of the embroidered part of the stocking together and stretch them out there, and then pin right the way around the edge, but we've got to leave a gap because we need to turn it out the right way. So I'm going to leave my gap actually in the lining on the back here, because it's easy afterwards just to hand stitch and make the stitching invisible. So I'm just going to pin that together. I'm going to pin it on the other side because I've marked out a 1/2 inch stitch line all the way around, and I used exactly the same method as when we were doing the actual embroidery on the stocking. So very easy, very quick. So now I'm just going to line everything up. I'm going to start with the cuff. Some loose threads up. Just lining up the actual embroidery itself so that both the stitch seams line up nicely, and then when I stitch on top of them, when I turn it out the right way, you won't see any of the outer edge. Right, to remind myself of where I need to leave the gap, I put 2 pins in next to each other. I'm just going to leave about 6 inches, maybe a bit less, 4 maybe. Pieces here where you've got the 2 pieces, I'm pushing them together so they're facing the same way. It just reduces the bulk a little bit. And it's the way that the fabric naturally wants to, you know, lay. So, same for this side as well. Now, one thing I do need to be careful of is that my tag here for hanging it up is inside between the 2 fabrics. If it's out this side, I'm going to lose it. I think this one is going to be 1 up and 1 down. It's the less bulky option by the feel of it. Oops. Check it here as well. As long as if it's going up this side and up this side, it has to be up this side, sorry, because otherwise it's going to leave a twist and a bulge in the middle. So just be careful of that. Okay, I'm now ready to stitch around. I may have a bit of trouble with my machine around here because it really doesn't like thin stretchy fabric, and I've just got 2 pieces of thin stretchy fabric together. If you ever have a problem with your machine not stitching properly because the fabric's thin and stretchy, pin a piece of tearaway stabilizer on top and try that, because quite often that will solve the problem. And I find it easier to do that than I do doing pitch battle with my machine. So it's now all stitched. I'm going to turn it out the right way, and I'm going to start off with the thickest bit first. And that's the embroidered end. Okay, so there's, I'm just going to put my hand inside and push out the edges. Okay. All those seams a little bit, so they sit nicely. I didn't do too bad a job matching it up, considering. Okay, so now I'm going to put the lining inside the stocking. And this is the bit that isn't, no, I'm not. I've got to stitch up here first before I do that. And I'm going to do that by hand, so join me in a minute once I've done that. Okay, so I've stitched that up now, so I can push this down inside the stocking. have it, one stocking finished. I'm going to give that a press just so that it all sits nice and evenly, and then I'll be back. So there it is, my sumptuous Christmas stocking. I think anybody would be proud to hang that up at Christmas. If you enjoyed this stitch along, please give me a thumbs up. Tell me what you think of my stocking in the comments below. I will be making a stitch along for the Crazy Patch version of this stocking very soon, so don't forget to subscribe to be notified of any new stitch alongs as I publish them. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you again next time.